evening and welcome to the second of the IALD Light Conversation series. And today we're going to be joined by Mary Rushton-Beales and Steve Edge. And we are gladly supported by iGuzzini in today's talk. So thank you very much to iGuzzini for helping us. Have the next slide, please. So I'm Emma and I look after the IALD in the UK. And I'm supported in doing that with Christopher Knowlton, who works at 18 Degrees, and he's also on the IALD board currently. If you have any questions about the IALD, about membership, or how to join, or what we do, please email me, get hold of me. My information's on our website, and I'll be happy to help you. So tonight's speakers are Mary Rushton-Beales, who I'm very pleased to say I worked with for a very long time, I think 11 years in total, back in the 90s. And had a wonderful time traveling the world with Mary and having very many lighting adventures, which will probably take up a whole nother series of light conversations. And Mary's based in West London. She has introduced Steve Edge today to talk as her very special guest, because they both definitely share a love of light and well-being in the built environment. So I'm very much looking forward to that joint conversation they're going to share with us this evening. Have next slide, please. So we're going to be talking about biophilia, the well standard, and salutogenic design and its relationship with light. And I am not very good at pronunciation or saying those things live on webcam, so I'm sure I'll be corrected in my pronunciations. So how do all these things come together in the built environment, and how do we embrace mindfulness and health? And using examples from their collective built environment knowledge through education and delivering projects internationally, they're going to share that knowledge with us. Please can I have the next slide. Mary is a former member of the IALD board with more than 30 years experience in the lighting industry and has been running her practice independently since 1995. She has a huge wealth of experience in daylighting and artificial light, and her projects range enormously through all types of commercial and residential projects. Please may I have the next slide. I'm very pleased to introduce Steve to you. Steve's career spans over 50 years in architecture, interior design and academia, which, as we'll all agree, gives him a wealth of knowledge to share with us. And with that, it comes with working on a range of projects from all over the place, which gives him a unique insight into this special topic. In 2016, he rebranded as a biophilic design consultant, and his latest commission with the Architects AHR is for the clients of the Royal College of Physicians. So you couldn't really have a better client to be talking about well-being and getting the full value of that built environment. So please have the next slide. I'm going to pass over to Mary and Steve, and I'll be speaking to you guys later after we've heard what these guys have got to say. So thank you. Good evening, Steve and Mary.
Thanks very much, Emma. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks very much to IALD UK and iGuzzini for getting us to do this. Now, I want to talk about salutogenic design to begin with, but that's because Steve said to me, well, it's really important when we discuss what we were going to say, salutogenic design. And although I like to think I know about promoting well-being and bringing joy, I simply didn't really understand it. So, Steve, over to you to explain a little bit about salutogenic design.
Okay, the slide on the right with the father of salutogenics is Aaron Antonovsky. Sadly died in '94, as you can see. Wrote a book, Health, Stress and Coping, in the late '70s, which it brought the term in salutogenics. And salos is Latin for health. So in Italy, you would say salute, you know, when you go cheers, and then genesis is Greek, so from the origin of something. So it promotes health rather than it's the antithesis of pathogenic, which is to cure health. So when it's translated into building science, salutogenic design, it ends up you know, encouraging the buildings and the architects and the occupants to think about health from the outset, rather than curing any problems that might arise later on through once the occupants come in. And there's a diagram on the left there from Martin Brown that just sort of looks where we are on the bottom left, really in straightforward terms, but moving towards the right, where we'd hope to be if we were promoting salutogenic design.
So in a way, Steve, it's a bit like the difference between Eastern and Western medicine, where in ancient times, Eastern doctors were paid to keep their patients healthy from the very beginning, whereas in Western medicine, they got paid once they got ill and then had to make them better. So it's things better from the very beginning is the principle.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, we were chatting earlier today about the problems with the housing stock that we have in the UK. It's some of the worst housing in Europe, with problems with damp, lack of insulation, poor heating, etc., etc., which creates an unhealthy living environment. And if we can improve the health of the people in their homes, then we won't be needing hospitals as much as we do at the moment. So it's a big challenge.
It's a great starting
point. Next slide, should we do? Yeah. Next slide, please. Here we go. I put this in really to think about, well, in the current COVID-19 pandemic that we've got around the world, an image of a lift set of buttons there. Will people be using lifts or elevators, should I say, as much as they used to do in the future, in workplaces, for instance? Will they be crowding into lifts, or
will we have to book our slot on them, Steve?
Sorry?
Perhaps we might have to book our slot in the lift.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that one company had started putting marks on the floor where you would stand on the floor of the lift to socially isolate yourself. But you could only get 2 or 3 or maybe 4 people in, where you could usually get 8 to 10. So all that's going to change. And then I was just remembering this image on the right there with the woman dancing on the steps, and their pressure steps where they make the noise of a piano. So to encourage people to use staircases, which is one of the things I do in salutogenic design, putting interactive artwork within the stairwell, so you don't all wait in the queue for the lift. You can go on the stairs and make it fun or interesting to actually walk up and down the stairs. And I think we'll be doing a lot more of that in the future. That whole activity-based working, but also to make it fun, so that it shouldn't just be so obvious. I think that's the key for the future. Should we do next slide? Thanks.
Yeah, so okay. Steve, I've been inspired so much more by biophilia, because it seems to be the essence of imagination, whereas the WELL standard seems to be so much about numbers and about ticking boxes. And I'd just like to know, what's your opinion?
Yes, it is. Well, all the standards like WELL and BREEAM and LEED and SCAR, they're all rating systems. So inevitably they're going to be a box ticking exercise, quite a complicated one. And it's my job to put the WELL standards together with Biophilia and salutogenics sometimes, but predominantly with Biophilia, to get the maximum WELL standards points that we can get for the certification. And that's the interesting bit, as you say. You know, that Biophilia is much more, it's less prescriptive, and you don't have to have every biophilic pattern known to man. You can be more selective. And it's not a box ticking exercise. So that's the beauty of it. But I think that the WELL standards are going to be the as we move forward into this post-pandemic future, the WELL standards are going to be at the forefront. I think they're going to be paramount, because they deal primarily with the health and well-being of people, of the users, of the occupants of the buildings, as opposed to BREEAM and well, BREEAM's got a lot better now, but some of the other rating systems that that are predominantly about the building construction or about the materials. So,
or about energy saving, whereas WELL has a massive amount. It does have an amount about well-being and includes biophilia, doesn't it? But it's not. You don't have to have all of the best aspects of biophilia, but you do get some points, don't you?
I think also with WELL, for instance, you can't just tick the boxes right at the beginning. They come back, I think, annually and check that you are, for instance, serving healthy food in your canteens or whatever it might be, or encouraging people to exercise, or encouraging people to think about health and well-being. So that's the other good point about it. Do we have the next slide? Okay, as I said a few minutes ago, this is my job is to mold these two things together as much as I can. The WELL 10 concepts. This is version 2 of WELL on the left. You can see all the various categories in those 10 concepts. And I work closely with the interior designers and also with the WELL APs, accredited professionals, to ensure that we look at how innovative we can be in what we're doing in terms of design. And the 14 patterns on the right, the biophilic patterns that have been created by Terrapin Bright Green, the architects in the States. And incidentally, one of the authors of the original 14 patterns is a chap called Joe Clancy, who was a landscape architecture student at the University of Gloucestershire. Put a plug in there for them.
One of your students.
I've just left the University of Gloucestershire, but the landscape architecture course is very good, and there's still some of his tutors there. And I've met Joe, and he's an excellent chap, and he was on his year out working for the company, and helped. It was produced originally by Stephen Kellett and Elizabeth Calabrese, who came up with quite a complicated set of standards, and they Terrapin Bright Green narrowed them all down to these 14 key patterns, and some of which look at, for instance, nature in the space. The first 7 there, they're quite obvious. Presence of water, all the things, visual connections with nature, non-visual connections with nature, etc., etc. They're pretty straightforward. And the natural analogues, the sort of thing that you might have, for instance, images of nature that you might have in wallpaper or in large photo murals, and things that aren't quite as obvious. And then the final thing, the nature of the space, is even more complicated, but that goes back to our psyche, I suppose, when we were cavemen and cave women in the savannah, looking for food. We'd go out hunting. We'd need to have prospect. We'd also need to have refuge. So, and we'd also have an element of mystery in our lives. So these are deep embedded into our psyche, and they've been taken away from our daily lives in our work environments or our home environments a lot of the time. So because we spend 2/3 of our lives, in fact, probably more, inside buildings, and if we don't start thinking again about what exactly we're doing there, then we're going to have real problems as we move forward.
I mean, what I love about the biophilic patterns is it's such a refreshing place to start with having ideas, rather than starting with numbers or starting with brand guidelines. You really end up, you start with such a different place. You're inevitably going to end up in a much more interesting design, final design solution.
And that's it. I work with the interior designers, and we just select half a dozen of those patterns, and we focus on those and bring out the best rather than overkill and do everything. We bring out the best, and then how can we put them with the WELL standards? So, but also with BREEAM as well, but predominantly with WELL. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, just a little bit about what I think will, again, what I try and look at, but also what I think the future will hold. The building on the left is the Edge building in Amsterdam, which got the highest BREEAM score, I think, of 98.6 or something like that, 5 or 6 years ago when it was opened. And the Edge developers are opening buildings like this all around the world, and there's a couple set for London coming up in the near future. But you can see it's not exactly a biophilic building, because it doesn't have a great deal of indoor planting, but it's got so many similarities with biophilia, all that natural light that's coming in, and also the evidence of not the evidence, but the obviousness of a staircase to encourage people to go up the staircase. And Edge, I think they're one of the best developers around, which is why I've included this slide, because whilst it's not classified exactly as a salutogenic building, to me it's the antithesis of them. And the other things I think we'll be thinking about in future, this declare and the product that we'll be specifying, materials and products. More and more we want to know what their embodied energy is in them, where the materials are, if there's any chemicals in there that might have toxins released when they off-gas, or if there's any recycled element, or what can we do at the end of their product life, which is when the other thing is the circular economy becomes important, so that we don't waste all the materials that we're currently doing. So will become important in the future.
Because this declare is something that really came into being most towards the end of last year. Is that right, Steve? But it's not really come into lighting, I don't think.
For many years, and we've just adopted it more formally. I think last July, I think it was last year, it became. But you can put your product on there. So there aren't that many products. For instance, there's not that many furniture products. Because I was looking at them recently, hoping that there might be. And furniture is one of those things, workplace furniture is the thing really I'm talking about. It's unregulated, and as well, not totally, but predominantly unregulated. FF&E is unregulated. Yeah, it's something that I think we will all have to conform with as we move forward with all the changes of the new norm that we're going to be having in work, rest, and play.
It can only be a good thing if we think more deeply about where things come from and embodied energy and how many people they employ, whether they employ them in a fair way. All of those things I think are really vital.
Yeah, because also if we're thinking about them, if we're designing for, say, disassembly, which is what we should be doing for the circular economy, so rather than designing and then breaking it up at the end of its life in 5-10 years time, but to be able to dismantle it and recycle it and keep it in the loop as long as possible, then we'll need really to know what the properties of those materials are as much as possible. Anyway, should we have the next slide? Okay, well, you can start with that one on the left. One is yours.
Yes, so we were talking about what would our favourite patterns of biophilia be, and obviously the obvious one for me to say is dynamic and diffuse light, but because that's about lighting design. But there are so many aspects of best practice lighting design incorporated in dynamic and diffuse light. So instead, I chose connection with natural systems, because I believe that gives us an opportunity to create awareness of the seasons, the cycles of life and ecosystems, which would then lead to us maybe varying the lit environment and link new technologies and materials that have much more robust credentials.
Yeah, I agree.
That's my favourite.
Well, I've put the number one in there, which is just pretty straightforward, the visual connection with nature. That's another image from Terrapin Bright Green there. Which I think encapsulates a lot more than just the connection, because the ability, I mean, I remember designing in the 70s and the 80s where cellular offices in workplace design, cellular offices with the executives who were predominantly male taking over the windows with their cellular offices, and the secretaries or the PAs who were predominantly female not having any access to natural light or any access to views outside. And I argued many times about that in our designs. And so we were, and it wasn't just me, I mean, I was just one of many at that time, but the importance of being able to sit at your desk and then just look out the window and see, is it raining, is it snowing, is it night, is it day? And that connection with nature or with the weather or with the world is incredibly important. But also this chap in this photograph is he's just daydreaming as well, and that ability to let your thoughts just drift off somewhere else, away from the stress and strain of your daily life or your work.
I suppose the only thing is, Steve, where do you put daydreaming on your timesheets?
Yeah. Well,
are you allowed? How much daydreaming are you allowed?
Yeah, well, you should be allowed a lot more. Maybe it's just so important. It doesn't have to be that long, you know. It could be a minute or two, but just to be able to lose yourself and think, yeah, what am I going to do tomorrow? Or, you know, how can I get down into that greenery down there? But if you bring a lot of it inside, then you don't have, you know, you don't have that problem as much as you used to do. Should we go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the final slide. We were trying to think of what to end with. We've been discussing all sorts. Do you want to talk a little bit about the lighting bit before I go on to this? The future about technology and how it might.
So I think the current crisis is definitely leading everyone to look at very innovative and unusual techniques. And this particular artwork that you're going to talk about, Steve, it uses titanium dioxide, and titanium dioxide can also be used not just in this particular situation. It's being used to try to deal with outdoor air pollution, but it can also be used in conjunction with ultraviolet light to clean the air. And there is a fitting that someone's come up with, which is not very nice to look at, but which does combine titanium and ultraviolet light, and allegedly does clean the air. And there's even another one that has not just ultraviolet light that cleans the air, but it also has sound absorption. So there are some amazing things out there, and I think this is going to be a great disruptive catalyst for some really good ideas.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I selected this image, excuse me, I'm just going to, I've been talking too much. From our UK poet laureate Simon Armitage, who was a fellow Yorkshireman. So if anybody listening around the world, and you want to Google what's the importance of being a Yorkshireman, but we tend to stick together. Anyway, he works at the University of Sheffield, and this is one of his poems in praise of air, and it's a great poem. If people look it up and use that link there, but it's printed, as you say, onto a banner, textile presumably, that's coated with titanium dioxide. And what titanium dioxide, I think, reacts with light. It's non-toxic, so whilst it's a nano paint or a nano coating, it gets used in food production, and it's not as theoretically harmful as many of the other nano materials or nano coatings, which people are worried about. Although I think most of the nano coatings or nanotech associations in the UK would probably have lots of good science evidence to counteract everything I'm saying. But what I think it does, I think it actually destables a lot of the pathogens that are floating around and stops them from flying, basically. So if we had buildings that were coated in this, or products that were coated in this, or fittings that were coated, it was something else, along with biophilia, along with trees absorbing some of the toxins. But a lot of it doesn't get, as we've discovered, doesn't get absorbed through leaves as much as we think it does. And there's that argument again from the specialists and the experts about how much does a leaf actually per square centimetre or per quarter of an inch, square inch, or whatever it might be, how much does it actually absorb any?
Well, yes, there's all that research about how the roots are more important than the leaves, which fascinating.
Yeah. Well, trees are also, I think, mainly absorbing carbon dioxide in photosynthesis, whereas titanium dioxide disables NOx, nitrous oxide, which is the biggest pollutant. I think, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 times worse than carbon dioxide. And I was listening to a program on the radio the other day about the Oxford Street in London and how polluted, more polluted than parts of Beijing, which you can't really think it was, because it was predominantly diesel cars and predominantly diesel buses that were going up and down Oxford Street. So people working there or walking there or shopping there day in and day out were being subject to all the emissions, because diesel is a big NOx emitter. So that's a big problem with diesel. So nitrous oxide is 10 times, thousands of times worse than carbon dioxide. So, and the other thing we've talked about with the circular economy moving to the future, but it's worth thinking about all these other things that we've just been discussing in terms of when we discuss together, we brainstorm, which is what we're doing now in some respects. What can we do with our combined expertise and combined knowledge to actually improve living and working conditions and leisure conditions and retail conditions for the future? So it's a good challenge, but a huge challenge.
It's a good challenge, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're ready for some questions now.
Are we on to the next slide? Well, there we go. I've talked so much, my voice is going. So.
Thank you very much, Mary and Steve. It is actually quite difficult to just keep talking for quite a while, but it was lovely to keep you guys keeping that conversation going. Steve, I was wondering if you think the situation that we're living through now, so people working from home and maybe having more time to think about their lives when they return to work, is going to drive business owners or the decision makers to make our working environments more friendly to us, to make us more healthy, or think about us? Or do you think it'll just snap back into it all being about numbers and making money?
No, I hope not. I hope it won't be anywhere. I think we've got to have a new norm, and I think people will be they'll be realizing now, large corporations will be realizing how much rent they're paying for these huge, great buildings that they put all their workers in, and how much they could save if people work partly from home, if they want to work from home, or if they work remotely. And similarly, how much they would save if they didn't fly around everywhere, or if they didn't travel, and how much pollution we would reduce. So I'm hoping there's going to be a new norm, and that will come through with how we construct buildings or how we construct interiors in the future. But I think also people like the Lord Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is already. I follow him on LinkedIn, and he's already announcing that he's going to start pedestrianising more streets and making more bike lanes. Which if he does within London, I mean, it would be chaos, but if he does, then that will be great, and that will, again, that's another choice of way in how we get to work. Never mind what happens once we get there, or how we get to where we're going. So it will hopefully change the way. It should change for the better.
So this might be the opportunity, if you have if people have buildings in the city, to recycle, like you were saying, to relook at how you're doing things, and you to recycle and relook at your working day, and how planning your time. Well,
yeah, similarly with the same way in which we're looking at sending children back to school, where we might have had half a dozen kids around a table, or 4 kids around a table, all working together in a little group, we might end up putting them back in desks, so that in the old way of teaching them, where they're separated. Similarly, how do we separate them at work? How do we separate people at work? I was exchanging emails from a friend of mine who's a design director for a large restaurant, and he was thinking of social distancing within the restaurant. When people come in, how's all that going to do? And do you order your food beforehand, or how do you pay? Do you pay beforehand? And so and you, how close does your waiter get to you when it brings it to you, or she brings it to you? So lots of questions in terms of social distancing outside and how we bring that into the interior. So yeah.
I think we have to be careful that it's not the death of spontaneity, and that we have to make sure we're on it. we don't just let everybody go back to the old way.
There's lots of strategies potentially we can work towards, and really think about it, rather than just say, well, you know, we can work because we've got a laptop or a mobile phone, we can work anywhere. It won't be as easy as that. So
I think this very much is the time when designers get to, you know, work their metal. Really, designers are here to solve problems, and we're being presented with a new problem. So with that, I would like to thank you both very much for being part of our webinar today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for
Fantastic. Enjoy the beautiful weather we're having too.
Indeed, yeah. I'm looking out the window now at lots of biophilia out there.
Today, yes. This webinar is recorded and will be up on the IALD YouTube channel for us all to view later, share with our parents, show how famous we are. Thank you very much again, and please do log on next Tuesday for our next talk, which will be between Keith Bradshaw and Adam Scott, and we very much look forward to seeing you all. If you do have any questions for what you say, please do email me, and I'm sure Mary and Steve will be very happy to answer them.
Always.
And have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.